to week 8 of Solo Ship. I'm Squirrel Patrol. I'm joined by JMtoWin from 1 week season. JM, last week, it looked like Lamar Jackson broke the slate in the early games, and then Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs just came back in the afternoon game. So, we'll show you something. How was your week 7?
Probably not as good as your week 7. I don't know. How was your week 7?
Actually, I didn't win money, but it was one of those things where I was like just down a little bit, and I just didn't hit on like a tournament win. But I was like close enough that like if we replay that week a bunch of times, I'll win money. When I win, and I'll win tournaments enough to pay off the week. I think I was like second in 2 King of the Beach qualifiers and 1 FanDuel live final qualifier. But when you're second place in those things, it always sticks out. But you're never looking when you're in first to see like who is in second or how far.
Yeah. Every time you're in first, somebody else has the same story that you have of like, you barely finished second. I felt similar in that if we could have played out the slate 100 times, I probably would have come out ahead. I had 30% of my money tied up in Deshaun Watson. So negative 0.8 points set me behind, but it just takes one roster, right? And I had highest owned running back was Jerome Ford. Second highest owned was Deontay Foreman. About 20% of my rosters were Mahomes and Lamar. So, I had the pieces. I actually finished way down last week, but didn't feel bad about the week. Didn't miss any pieces. I just didn't come together.
Yeah. So on to this week. We actually have more games. We have 13 games. That kind of reduces ownership everywhere. The first thing that stuck out to me was we've got 6 teams with an implied point total over 24 in descending order. It's Miami, Dallas, Kansas City, Baltimore, the Eagles, and the 49ers. And each one of those teams plays a team with a point total below 20. So kind of similar games and situations across the board. A bunch of those quarterbacks are guys that I'm interested in, maybe for different reasons. A bunch of them are rushing quarterbacks, and I'm having a difficult time like kind of parsing through each of them and deciding who I like more.
Interesting. Yeah. I, for me, obviously for quarterback, like scoring potential is a big part of things. For other positions, it's less just because you also want to think about price. You want to think about how concentrated the offense is. You want to think about like volume on the offense and all these different factors. So it's an interesting week in that we've got those games with the higher implied totals, the large spreads, but there's also like plenty of other games that stand out, So from a quarterback perspective, Hurts, Mahomes, Lamar, definitely on my list. Sam Darnold on my list. I think he'll be an interesting guy for you and me to talk about. But also Sam Howell in that game against Hurts, Desmond Ridder, who once again nobody's going to play, Mac Jones, even Derek Carr. Like there's some different places you can go at quarterback this week as well. So I'd be curious your thoughts on Dak Prescott, who's getting steamed up in terms of projections, ownership projections. Not a guy I'm on myself, but then I'm like, do I need to get a little bit of Dak Prescott? It's like he's on a team that doesn't like to throw the ball. So what? We're betting on the Rams keeping this game close, but nobody's wanting to play Rams pieces. What's your take there?
It's interesting. So it was 2 weeks ago. I did with like 11 a.m. show with Blender, and he mentioned Desmond Ridder. I'm like, oh, I'm totally off him. And then like you mentioned Desmond Ridder, and then Desmond Ridder was in the Millie Maker winning line. This week, I put Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb down as the stack I'm going to be most underweight on the expert survey. Do the 11 a.m. show with Blender. He's like, "What do you think about Dak Prescott?" and then then you mention him again. He was somebody I wasn't high on, but I could see it. I know like you don't like factor in ownership that much. Like for my large field play, I'd be interested in Dak if he's low owned. If he's high owned, I probably don't want to be there. But it's really hard to figure out what the field will think of him and like how many people are going to put him into their rosters. It's of the high point total teams. I was thinking it would be the one that I'm maybe least interested in. I think like Tony Pollard is going to get a lot of ownership, but I can see that, and I think especially on FanDuel, like Pollard is way too cheap. And that's like probably how I would play that game. But then if everyone's just playing Tony Pollard, Dallas is just sitting there with a 26 implied point total, one of the highest on the week. And like everybody's just playing Pollard and nobody's playing Dak Prescott. Well, then maybe I should be playing Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb instead of Tony Pollard. So I don't know. I'm probably going to be at or under the field on it. But it could be what comes back to bite me.
Yeah, there's certain times where Keenan Allen last week, and he's coming in at like 20% projected ownership against a Kansas City team that he hadn't topped 21 DraftKings points against in like 5 years. And a defense is like at the best they've been at in 5 years. And you see him projected at 20% owned. And then to me, I'm just like, okay, there's an edge that I have this week. It's like 0% of my rosters will have Keenan Allen. 20% of the field's rosters will have Keenan Allen. And I'm going to outscore that 20% with how I'm spending my salary. And then there's the situations like Dak where it's like, I don't want to play him and I don't want to just jump on him because like the field is higher on him than I am. But then I'm also like even before I looked at ownership or anything, I was kind of back and forth like, oh, Dak and CeeDee Lamb, and it's a passing attack I never play because fundamentally they don't want to be pass heavy. Fundamentally, they're typically going to have 30 or fewer pass attempts. But then again, I'm kind of like, hey, maybe CJ Stroud this week, and he's probably going to have 30 pass attempts. So, Dak's an interesting one to me. And probably it's one of those situations where I'll probably add some ownership on my end because he's grabbing ownership, right? So I'll still be underweight the field, but like I'll go from 0% Dak to like 6% Dak because maybe I'm just wrong on that. Like Keenan Allen last week was like, cool, everybody's wrong on this more often than not. And so I'll just take that edge. Dak, it's like, hey, maybe I'm wrong on this, or maybe the field is going to be right more often than I'm giving it credit for. So yeah, that's an interesting one to me this week.
I know exactly how I'm going to handle it. I'm going to be at, or I'm going to try to be at the field in multi-entry on Dak Prescott stacks, and I'm probably not going to play him in single entry. Like he's not somebody I want to be sitting there with one of my high dollar qualifiers, like sweating, like can Dak Prescott break the slate? But he's somebody that if he does break the slate, I want to be able to follow, a few teams in the Millie Maker or the Slant or whatever. Like in my 150 entry build, I'll have some Dak Prescott. I'm probably not going to play him in single entry. And I'm just not going to worry about ownership. Like he could be like 8-10% owned this week. He could be like 2-3% owned. I don't know. I'll play him at like 5% of my multi-entry rosters, and that's probably it. I think the guys, like if I'm spending up, I think the guys that I'm more interested in are Lamar and Jalen Hurts. They're in pretty similar situations, at least in my mind. And even like Patrick Mahomes, it's all kind of similar. They'll have like some rushing upside, probably Lamar, then Hurts, and then Mahomes, much less now. They've got like, expensive receivers at least. Well, I guess Kelsey's expensive and AJ Brown's expensive. Zay Flowers not as expensive, but you're almost like paying in probably pretty high ownership. And they're all playing in games that could be blowouts, could be close, could be the highest scoring team game of the slate or not, or it could be a blowout. We're just looking at these Gus Edwards touchdowns, shaking our heads with our Lamar Jackson rosters.
Yeah. Do you know that Gus Edwards, his best DraftKings score of his career is 22.5? He's like such a frustrating player because he can't, he's not useful in DFS himself, but he just takes away points from guys who would be useful for us. All three of those quarterbacks kind of in a similar setup. I think that Hurts is the most attractive to me because of how aggressive that, of these three defenses, Kansas City, Philadelphia, and Baltimore, all three teams have good defenses, but Philadelphia is the least good of the bunch this year. And you cannot run against Philadelphia. And then, the Philadelphians, what their opponent pass play rate is this year? 70.2%. So basically, like the average quarterback against Philadelphia throws more than the highest throwing quarterback in the NFL. You can't run against them. And then Washington's already third in the NFL in pass rate over expectation. So that creates that opportunity for Washington to keep it close and Hurts have to keep throwing deeper into the game. That's likelier that, like, if Kansas City, Denver is close, it's probably not because Denver's putting up a bunch of points. It's probably because Kansas City's not. If Baltimore, Arizona is close, maybe Kyler comes back and looks really good in his first game, but that seems low likelihood that he would be able to just like keep Arizona in this. So it's probably because Baltimore is underwhelming as opposed to Arizona's keeping it close. Whereas Washington could keep it close. So Hurts kind of stands out to me the most out of that bunch, but I like all three for sure.
All right. And then we should probably talk about Miami because they're a team with a high implied point total. And I think everybody wants to play Tyreek Hill. Nobody wants to play Tua. We just got word, I think, right before the show, like it looks like Raheem Mostert's going to play. I like my Dolphins. I'm actually wondering even if it could be a Jeff Wilson week. Like, can I sneak him in on a roster? People were thinking about it a few weeks ago when he came back. I think it was just 2 weeks ago, and he's like near minimum price, and then he ended up not coming back. This week, I'm thinking about it. He's like, I think, more off people's radars, but he's presumably a couple more weeks removed from injury. Any interest in the Dolphins? Like, do you think you'll get there?
I probably won't, and I'll be fine with I'll be fine not having Tyreek Hill. I expect to have 0% Tyreek Hill. I'll say why here in just a moment. But if he hits for 30, it's not going to kill me. And what kills me is if he goes for like 38 or 40 points, or if he goes for 30 and like nobody else on the slate does, but that seems pretty low likelihood. So this year, this is the list of like marquee players the Patriots have faced. Jalen Hurts, Tua Tagovailoa, Josh Allen, DeAndre Swift, Breece Hall, Tony Pollard, Alvin Kamara, Josh Jacobs, A.J. Brown, Tyreek Hill, CeeDee Lamb, Chris Olave, Devontae Adams, and Stephon Diggs. Every single one of them has disappointed. So to me, just, even though the Patriots can give up points and their DVOA ratings are low and all that, it's like they're not going to typically let just tons of volume concentrate on one player. So the fact that Hill can score from anywhere on the field makes him a player that, like, I can look at that data point and I'm also not going to try to talk anyone off of Tyreek Hill. If somebody's like, I'm playing 40% Tyreek Hill, I'll be like, cool, like that could end up being sharp. But like in a sense of he could score 30, I just have a hard time seeing him burying me for not having him. And so I'm going to try to chase players who I think could bury the field for the field not having them. Yeah,
I think I had said earlier in the year when I made my Dolphin statement, I think they're a transformative offense. I said, I think I want to be over the field on them every single week. And then I started thinking, they're going to have games against like the Bills, the Jets, the Patriots. Like those aren't the worst defenses. So maybe I don't want to be over the field like in these like divisional games, but I could see it going either way. That's like they're the team I would be most afraid of being underweight on. So I might just not take on that fear. I may, and I would be surprised if I'm not using a good amount of Tyreek Hill. Like
especially in Miami, like they're going to have a better bet of Patriots have struggled in Miami for all of Belichick's tenure. So definitely going to have a better bet of putting up that big game in Miami for sure.
So one last game that we didn't touch on, and we say we would get to it, like the Cincinnati-San Francisco game. I actually kind of added that on to my list of the initial teams on purpose because I think it's a game we have to talk about. Looks like Sam Darnold is going to be the quarterback. I think there's still some uncertainty there, but I think nobody's gotten out of the concussion protocol within 1 week. So it's probably going to be Darnold. And I'm more interested in Cincinnati than I usually am. And I'm more interested in both sides of this game because I could see it having a pretty wide range of outcomes. I don't think we know what to expect from Sam Darnold, and it could be short field for the Bengals, which might be good for Joe Mixon and Jamar Chase, or Darnold could be, he's the number 2 pick from the draft from a few years ago. What if he's pretty good? And we saw this kind of with Geno Smith, another ex-Jets quarterback, but it took him a few years as a backup, and then he got in the game, and everybody thought, oh, Geno Smith's terrible, and he wasn't so bad. And he's still the starter there in Seattle. So what if this game kind of goes over its total by a lot? Like San Francisco is one of the best offenses in the league. And what if we're basically getting Brock Purdy for $1,500, $2,000 cheaper?
Yeah, no, that's how I'm looking at it. And I said earlier today on one of my shows that the ownership projections that on OWS currently have Darnold at 10%. And if he is 10%, 10, 11, 12, I would expect him to be 17% in the Game Changer, which is the $1,500 single entry. Just because what that does for your roster, right? What that opens up. And just that standpoint of if you play Darnold and an 8K wide receiver versus one of these 8K quarterbacks and a 4K wide receiver, you probably come out ahead, right? Because Darnold, the 4K wide receiver, you're typically pretty stoked if they get 16 points. You're like, oh, nice. Rashid Shaheed, Curtis Samuel got me 16 points, 18 points, whatever. whereas Darnold could get you 22 to 25. And then you actually have like maybe a higher ceiling on the Jamar Chase, AJ Brown type plays than the high priced quarterbacks. So no, I think he's interesting, and he looked good in training camp. And there was even talk from San Francisco beat reporters of like, hey, maybe Sam Darnold is going to start over Brock Purdy, which that, Shanahan was like, not a chance, but beat out Trey Lance, who the 49ers still kind of liked. And he looked good in Carolina last year. So I think that in this offense, it's so quarterback friendly. Look at the Texans, right? You can't sack with their offensive coordinator coming from San Francisco, Bobby Slowick. You can't sack CJ Stroud, even though they don't have a great offensive line. Nico Collins and Tank Dell are both like top 12 in the NFL in yards per route run in this offense. Like guys are just open. The ball comes out quickly. I think Darnold's interesting. And I think that one of the things people will overlook is that the Bengals are lights out against alpha options on the offense. They're really good against number one wide receivers and have been as long as Lou Anarumo has been there. So I think that people kind of maybe gravitate more toward Ayuk than they should and not as much toward Kittle as they should. We know about Kittle's splits without Debo. 6 games since the start of 2021. 3 of those have been 12 to 13-point games. One of those was a 25-pointer. One of those was a 33-pointer. One of them was a 42-pointer. So I think that the Kittle, CMC, Darnold, that whole pack there is interesting to me.
Sometimes, just having a couple of years as a backup is just the ticket that a player needs to find success. And speaking of, more memories are made when you're there for live NFL action. And when you need tickets, Ticketmaster has got you covered. As the official marketplace of the NFL, Ticketmaster gives you more ways to find your perfect seat. Their interactive seat map gives you 360-degree previews of your section to make sure you have the best view of those pivotal plays. And if your plans change, Ticketmaster gives you more flexibility to sell or transfer your tickets. Plus, mobile tickets make getting in on game day a breeze, and you can even customize your Ticketmaster app to rep your team's colors. Find tickets today at Ticketmaster.com/NFL. So, we kind of touched on all the higher implied point total teams. There are some teams with lower implied point totals that are in like lower total games, but the spread is a little bit closer. Which of those games, I guess, anything in particular from lower point total games that's like sticking out to you?
Yeah, I mean, Derek Carr has 20 plus DraftKings points in back-to-back games with only 1 touchdown thrown in both of those. And he's capable of having a 3 touchdown game, right? So all of a sudden one of those becomes a 28, 29 pointer. Desmond Ridder plus Drake London would have kept you on a 200-point pace 3 of the last 6 weeks. They're playing this Tennessee team that, tilts opponents toward the air and typically isn't good at stopping opponents through the air. And then even Mac Jones, there's just a lot that lines up. Patriots are actually 11th in drive success rate on offense, which is really good. It's just these turnovers and these boneheaded mistakes, right? But Dolphins have not been good at generating turnovers. They're 27th in drive success rate. Teams have to pass against them. So Mac Jones, Kendrick Bourne, I think that's another interesting one. And all of those, like, they're not materially more expensive than Sam Darnold. And I see this as a week where the presence of Darnold at 4,300 is going to suck all the ownership away from those guys. And so those guys become even more interesting to me because the ownership goes lower and the ceiling is, just as high as what Darnold could end up putting up.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, speaking of more memories are made, I literally can't remember the last time I saw an NFL game with both teams having an implied point total less than 20, which is a situation in Atlanta and Tennessee. Desmond Ridder and Drake London are underpriced, but I almost want to say like they beat me consistently with an implied point total below 20. I just don't know what to do. So we'll see. I'm not sure if I'm that high on that game, but I can see it. Like from a price considered perspective, I think it might be more of a DraftKings play than a FanDuel play. Like you generally don't need that much price efficiency on FanDuel.
No, agreed, 100%. Yeah, and I mean, I primarily play DraftKings, so if I'm throwing something out there, that's where I'm seeing it for sure.
yeah, definitely. And Sam Darnold actually kind of fits into that category too, because I think he's going to be 6,000 on FanDuel. I forget the exact price, but generally the quarterbacks don't go below 6,000, and that's not as much of a savings as like a $4,300, $4,100 quarterback.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
I'm interested. You didn't mention CJ Stroud in the narrative game against Carolina. I know Carolina's got a bad defense, tends to be more of a bad rushing defense. So like maybe Dameon Pierce is in play, but there's the narrative that the Panthers skipped over Stroud in the draft, traded up to get Bryce Young instead. And I feel like you've been generally pretty high on the Houston offense this year.
Yeah, so my drawback on the Houston offense, we've got this 44 pass attempt game week 1, 47 week 2, in games that Houston lost, in games they were trailing the whole time. Since then, 30, 30, 35, 27, Panthers faced the highest opponent rush play rate in the NFL. So my projections for CJ Stroud is around 30 pass attempts, which puts Nico and Tank Dell in like the 4 to 7 target range. And I just think that like that's going to be more popular than I necessarily want to go toward at that type of volume. At the same time, my first practice build of the week had CJ Stroud on it, so I'm not totally off the spot. I just think that the volume, it's going to be tough for him to like put up a 30-pointer, in a spot where he's probably throwing the ball 27 to 30 times. Really like Dameon Pierce, who nobody's going to be on. And, there's plenty to dig into there. But, I like the Texans offense, and I would be fine with any pieces of the Texans offense. But volume is kind of the main concern for me with Stroud.
Yeah, I was actually going to like write up a blurb on this game, as thinking, Nico Collins is probably the natural pairing partner for CJ Stroud. I think he is. Tank Dell is a possibility, like nowhere near as cheap as he was to open the season. Nico Collins has the most yards per catch in the NFL this season, like almost 2 yards more than Tyreek Hill. Like, that was a stat I found surprising. But I will probably aim again to like maybe at 5% of that game, but it's a more fun percent. More fun, like 5% than the Dak 5%.
Yeah.
I think it has possibilities, and I think Dameon Pierce is another call. It's pretty interesting because what if it's not a split backfield? Like, we would have been shocked at the beginning of the year to see Dameon Pierce against a really bad rushing defense, really cheap and not very highly owned. So I'm not sure why more people aren't going there. So that's a call I'm interested in. Hot takes before I forget. Any hot take for the week?
Why don't you go first? I'll have to let me cook up one.
Sure. So my hot take, it's not scorching hot, but just that I think Brandon Powell outscores Jordan Addison and TJ Hawkinson.
I love that. Brandon Powell, also the punt returner for the Vikings, so you could double up Powell plus Vikings defense. I will go ahead. What do they have there? I don't know. I don't know if I have a hot take this week. I'll say Calvin Ridley's going to outscore Christian Kirk by 10 points on DraftKings this week.
So that's actually an interesting one. So I think Jacksonville is being somewhat overlooked. We've had weeks this year where Jacksonville is pretty popular. And this week, I think it looked like Zay Jones was coming back, and now it looks like he's not. And I know like the 1 week season write-up had some kind of thing about press coverage that, I think that like Calvin Ridley generally does pretty well against press coverage, and he doesn't do well against press coverage. But he's probably not going to be facing a lot of it this week. I guess like Pittsburgh plays the least in the league. So it's I'm not that interested in the Pittsburgh side. Like, I think Deontay Johnson's going to see a lot of ownership. And I always just think of him as a good median point projected scorer. Like, he's going to get some receptions and yards, probably not find the end zone. And like, he won't kill you on a point per dollar basis, but he's not going to win you a tournament either. Kind of like a poor man's Keenan Allen, or poor man's Keenan Allen coming into the year.
Yep. 100%.
Yeah, but I think Jacksonville could be a team that I'm interested in, because I think they're going to see lower ownership, single digit ownership, probably more of a multi-field, interest than a single entry interest. Even in single entry, I could see, like, you wouldn't be shocked if Trevor Lawrence and Calvin Ridley broke the slate. Everybody was rushing to play Calvin Ridley at higher prices earlier in the year. Like, he's still the same wide receiver. So I think that's an interesting call.
Yeah, well, the Calvin Ridley thing, and I'll have him on some single entry rosters this week for sure. It contrasts perfectly with what you were saying about Deontay Johnson. People like playing Deontay Johnson because when they look through his game logs, they see double-digit points across the board. I mean, his highest score last year was 20 points. Not to see that he can't get above that this year, but you're like, 11 points, 12 points, 14 points. Whereas Calvin Ridley, you have a 22-pointer and a 27-pointer, but then also Like the whatever he's got, the 2-pointer and the 5-pointer. Let's see, he's got a 5-pointer, a 7-pointer, a 1.5 pointer. But no, he sets up well in this matchup against a Steelers team that has gotten scorched for big plays, and Calvin Ridley is the big play guy on this offense. So yeah, that's one that I like. I mean, this mid-range of price on DraftKings, you got T. Higgins, who's 5,900, and nobody wants to play him, right? Like, because again, people look at the game logs, and I do. I don't know if you've watched my DFS Lab show that I do, but it's me and my nephew Keegan. And the concept there is that Keegan's been playing DFS like somewhat casually, but trying to get good at it for a couple of years. And so he's kind of like the proxy for the audience of people who are newer to DFS, right? And one of the things that I've noticed is the first thing Keegan does when he's thinking about a player is he clicks on their game logs. And that's what a lot of casual players do. And so you click on T. Higgins' game line, projection system. It's like, oh, it's a new year and T. Higgins has done this. 3 straight bad games is what you see, plus a 0 in the game that he missed. But what was that in reality and context? It was one bad game, then a game where he got hurt, and then a game where he played limited snaps, where he came back before he was ready, but they kind of needed him, and he played limited snaps. So it's like one bad game, and everybody's off of him. He's got a 28.9 pointer on his ledger. He scored 26 plus in 7 of 28 games, since Jamar Chase was drafted. So yeah, I think he's really interesting too. Kind of in this mid-range of wide receivers on DraftKings, where there's a lot of really interesting wide receivers.
It's interesting. It's like the week of the forgotten man.
Yeah.
and Calvin Ridley and T. Higgins is a great one. I mentioned being interested in the Cincinnati San Francisco game. I forgot T. Higgins was playing in that game because he's like, I love playing those players, like the guys that come back and we're kind of thinking about them like, oh, like I want to get T. Higgins into my roster. He's back this week, and he totally disappoints. Then his price drops. The following week, when the guy is healthier, nobody wants to play him. Oh, did you see what he did last week? He did nothing, right? And like, yeah, I think Jamar Chase is going to see a lot of ownership, and I'm interested in playing Jamar Chase.
Absolutely, yeah.
Like that San Francisco game has like a wide range of outcomes. Like people aren't going to play T. Higgins, but he's probably like, if you want to fit like Christian McCaffrey onto your roster, like you might need to be playing T. Higgins instead of Jamar Chase, depending on what else you're going with. So yeah, I think that's a really interesting call.
Yeah. Ridley, T. Higgins, that's like $6,700 wide receiver, $7,200 wide receivers a few weeks ago, and now they're in the 5K range and will have low ownership to boot.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so one last game, like New Orleans and the Colts. You kind of mentioned Derek Carr. Like, is that a game you think you'll be interested in? I don't know. I can see it. It's indoors. Got a close spread. It wasn't really on my radar, but yeah, it's kind of growing on me that, well, why not that game? Like, why not the indoor environment? Like, if Derek Carr's, again, like 1 week removed from the shoulder injury, you've got Alvin Kamara there, Chris Olave, like you've got players who can break a game open. Why couldn't it be that game?
Yeah, I mean, Olave's got a game of 96 yards, a game of 86 yards, a game of 104, a game of 112. He's capable of putting up one of those 150-yard games. He's got 5 touchdowns in his whole career, right? But that doesn't mean that he can't put up a 2-touchdown game. So yeah, it's one of those where we still haven't seen it yet with Chris Olave, but it can happen and it will happen at some point. We haven't seen it yet with Derek Carr, and this is a Colts defense that has been hit for some big games through the air. And then, on the other side, like I am pretty much across the board multiple years. Like I just kind of cross off offenses against New Orleans because they don't typically give up big games. But I kind of have the Colts in the 2017 Astros bucket, where it's like, if you just stack them every week, regardless of opponent, you're probably going to make money over time by doing that, right? Like what I've said is you can't run against Tennessee, and then Zach Moss had a huge game against Tennessee. You can't run against Baltimore. Zach Moss had a huge game against Baltimore. You can't pick up yards against the Browns. The Colts picked up a ton of yards against the Browns. So just this Shane Steichen offense, his aggressive mindset, his willingness to attack. They're kind of one of those, like, yeah, I'm going to have as much Dak as I have. I'll have that much Gardner Minshew and Colts, even though the matchup's bad, just because you're like, who knows with this team? Like on a random week, they're going to have a big game. And I want to start being there every time that it happens.
Yeah. Jonathan Taylor, maybe another forgotten man. Like,
yeah.
The whole theme of the week. I'm glad we hit on a theme. We're like practically building a roster with how we do on the show. But yeah, it's the forgotten guys like Taylor, Dameon Pierce, T. Higgins, Calvin Ridley. Interesting roster. We've got to find a quarterback for that team. But yeah, So that'll just about wrap it up. Any final thoughts on the week?
13 games, man. Lots to sort through. If you guys are watching this, you're a step ahead because you're kind of getting deeper into sorting through like how the different players match up. But yeah, the most complicated thing on a week like this is it can feel like, oh, there's so much to like. So you got to start kind of pushing in a little bit more on some of these spots and see which ones you should actually like more, or which ones have, if everything's kind of equal, which one has a greater strategy edge. But yeah, there's a lot that we can do this week and a lot to like on this week for sure.
Yeah, I agree. Actually, it was a week that, like previous weeks, I've been struggling to find guys. I got to tag them in lineup HQ. Like this week, it's like, oh, I've got like 6 guys, and now I have 8. All right, now I really need to cut some out, but I don't know who to cut out. And we just hit on a few more on this show, and I think any of these guys is actually like viable for single entry. And I think it'll be an interesting week. Like if you've got the courage to maybe get away from some of the higher owned quarterbacks, like in single entry. Like there's nothing wrong with playing Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, like Patrick Mahomes. But there's a lot of viable quarterbacks that I think could be in a game environment that shoots out. So should be an interesting week. Hopefully do well, and we'll catch you guys next week.